Hello, this is Gary from Rocket Agency. I'm sitting here with David Lawrence, Managing Director.
Hey guys.
Hello. You have written an article this week, potentially controversial, entitled "Just because it's data, it doesn't mean it's right." Why are you thinking this way?
I'd love to think it's controversial. Sadly, I'm going to burst that bubble straight away and say I really don't think it is. As an agency, we have tons of data that we get our fingertips on all the time, and we love data. We make some incredible decisions with it. But something that really worries me is when a client comes in and they automatically say, we intend to make all our decisions based on data. And for so many of our clients, that's just not possible. And so it worries me. And I wanted, I guess, to start the conversation around the fact that just because you have numbers in front of you, it's reckless to assume those numbers are correct or will even lead you to a conclusion. So that's why I wrote the article, and that's the conversation I think we should have.
Okay, so those clients for whom a data-first approach is not always the best way, what are the commonalities? Who should be mindful of the fact that data is not necessarily the right way for them to go?
Absolutely. I think everyone should be mindful of it. I mean, probably one of the really common real-world examples that I see a lot is when you have a client, often a B2B client, but any client with a long sales cycle, we see clients where they look at metrics in Google Analytics and they're looking for those metrics to be signposts pointing them in the right direction. And so often the reality for them is that they have a very small number of high value sales per month. And they'd be much better off looking into what those small number of people did rather than looking at the masses of data in Google Analytics. They might find that their actual customers that create value for them are 0.1% of all the people that experience their website. So if you're looking at those big numbers on the website, you're potentially being led into decisions of people that weren't even worth money to you in the first place. I know that I probably look at data from more of a usability point of view than you do. You get much more in the actual numbers. I know you're an actuary by trade, so you obviously love the numbers and the data. So how about you share something that you come across in terms of data limitations and problems?
Yeah, I would say that these, again, aren't limitations to the data, but it is a limitation of how data gets used. So I can think of a couple of examples. So first one is, for data to be meaningful, you have to have, a critical mass. You have to have a threshold of data at which it becomes statistically significant. And the unfortunate reality is that for a lot of clients, they just don't have that level of data. Or if they did have that data, they would have to wait potentially months to see data that was meaningful for their business. And so the very idea that you could have a low traffic website and draw conclusions of that in a month or even 3 months, sometimes that just doesn't happen. The other issue, I guess, is that data is only as good as the inputs. And so often we will see misconfigured implementations. I can think of a couple of examples. Google Analytics having been misconfigured in such a way that attribution at the channel level is not correct. And so, you might be tempted as a business owner to take money out of AdWords, for example, or SEO because you don't think that's driving conversions. And in fact, it's a simple configuration issue. And another example recently where revenue tracking was not correct. And this is interesting because it's not just humans that are prone to making bad decisions. Artificial intelligence is also very much a function of the data inputs. And in this case, with revenue tracking incorrect, we saw some campaigns that were optimized to revenue, and of course they failed because it just wasn't set up the right way.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it was actually a very simple thing to kind of fix up. Campaigns that had been struggling for months and months, and now running very well, but had that approach been taken right at the start, nothing would have gone wrong in the first place. Dave, what tips do you have? I should also say, by the way, that there's plenty of good data that we take out of Google
Plenty
Analytics.
of good data.
Plenty of good data. It happens all the time. It's most of what we do. Looking at ads that are getting best results, looking at keywords that are getting best results, optimizing towards them. It's a no-brainer. These are the minority of cases that we're talking about here. You just have to be aware of them.
We have to be aware of them, that's right. And I think something that we find as well is just because a company's large and has sophisticated resources in-house doesn't mean their data is going to be right. I often find that the larger a company gets, the more spread out their product and their data sets become as well, and you can almost have more errors. But definitely on that point of being sort of positive about data, absolutely, tons of great decisions. And we had a really good one the other day where we had a client came in, we're doing keyword research. They saw things in bulk, and our research indicated that there was a lot of traffic around for their particular product and the word wholesale. The client weren't really keen on that because technically they're not a wholesaler, and we understand that. But we said, look, bear with us. Let's go with what the data's suggesting and run it. And we did. And it's been actually one of their best performing campaigns. And the reason is that even though they're not a wholesaler, people don't necessarily understand that. They interchangeably use the word wholesale and bulk. So if it wasn't for looking at the data, if we'd been more relying on the reality, we probably wouldn't have come up with that particular keyword. The campaign would have suffered as a result. So I guess in the spirit of helping people get to a better place with data, have you got a particular tip that you would suggest people do with their data to make better decisions?
Yeah, I think just making sure that your implementation is kind of double checked right from the start, having reasonable expectations.
Yeah.
In terms of timeframes, being prepared to think behaviorally as well as kind of econometrically, to coin a phrase.
Okay, actuarial term.
Actuarial term.
Nice one.
But you know, obviously, where the data is kind of meaningful, then you want to follow that.
Yeah, I like it. I've got probably the one for me is around the business side of things. One of my pet hates with data is when people go into Google Analytics and just desperately look for a story. So I'd always suggest that people have a question, have a business question they would answer, and they go into analytics or whatever their package is to find the answer to that. Otherwise, what I think happens a lot is people go into it, they look for a story that maybe doesn't exist, and they focus on vanity metrics, which may or may not be important for them. So bounce rates, time on particular pages, path through the site. Stay right away from that, go into analytics with a clear business question, and then make decisions based on that.
Brilliant. Okay, and any final message for our viewers?
Look, I think if you have problems with data, we are always really happy to have a talk about it. So there's lots more resources on our website. But got any big questions, big problems? Get in touch with us. Love to have a chat.
All right. Thanks very much, Dave.
Thanks, Jess.
See you later. Bye.